Hi, thank you all for joining again for another session for Peaceful Passages. I'm looking forward to this aspect, and I'm always encouraged talking with my good friend and mentor, David Zinner, one of the founders of the Ben Zakkai Institute, where we learn a lot of protocols around Hever Kadisha, the Holy Society, on how to care for loved ones at the time of passing and all of the different elements that this entails. So one of the topics that I asked David to help me cover is the topic of Shmirah. And Shmirah is when the concept of when somebody passes away, we cover them in prayer. So from the point of death, the Shmirah coordinator is called, and they put out emails or text messages to set up people to be able to pray on different time slots. But that's a technical aspect, but I know this topic is one of David's strengths. So I wanted him to expound a little bit about Shmirah and all of the different elements that can be incorporated in with that. So I present my good friend, David Zinner.
Thanks, Theresa. Yeah, Shmirah is one of my favorite topics. The Hebrew root word is shomer, which means to guard. But guarding is an interesting concept because guarding includes both a physical guarding and a spiritual guarding. So when one does Shmirah, it's not just being in the same vicinity as the person's body who has died, but there's also an aspect of, what prayers do you say and what is the kavanah, what is the sort of intention behind those prayers. And some people don't do prayers, some people do other things, like, for example, they might read a story about the person's life, maybe the person created an ethical will that they would read and learn about them. Maybe they have left an album of pictures with the folks who are doing Shmirah. It's for them to leaf through so that they can get a better understanding of the person who they're praying for. Mm-hmm. So Shmirah is an interesting concept and has a lot of flexibility in how it's implemented, but the sort of basic underlying theme is being present with the person who died and offering prayers for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's one of the things that when I first really started getting involved with being a part of in Austin, the Jewish community, I was able to be a shomer. Shomer is the person that goes in and prays when somebody passes away. And it's been interesting because like you were saying, you don't necessarily have to know the deceased, but be able to go in and pray. And it's a way to be a part of helping and supporting the community without really needing to know the family. You're not really always in the room with the deceased. You're a lot of times at the funeral home and the deceased is still in another room in the refrigeration area waiting for the tahara to be done. So most of the shmirahs that I've done as a shomer, the deceased has not been in the room, but has been very, very close by. So we're still guarding them, making sure that, they're okay, but also praying for the family. And I think, the peace that brings families, knowing that there's people there, around the clock praying, really brings a sense of comfort to them.
Yeah, I think it's that is all correct, and it's really interesting how many different ways we can do Shmirah, how many different ways we can organize it. So, for example, many times friends or relatives or neighbors will say, "What can I do?" Right? Mm-hmm. And the person who's just had their loved one die often doesn't know what to say, right? This is one thing that they can suggest. You don't need any special skills, right? You just need a 1 minute orientation. So if, for example, your neighbor who doesn't really know anything about these traditions says, what can I do? Well, you can say, would you be willing to go down to the funeral home and do a 2-hour shift and be an honor guard and say prayers, right? That's something they could do.
Right.
So whether it's, a volunteer who's like on a regular Shmirah team, someone who does it all the time, or whether it's someone who does it because they want to be able to do something, both are okay. And that sort of opens the door to lots of other ideas. For example, you can do Shmirah as a team. You can do 2 people at the same time. So, for example, suppose you have a 15-year-old child who, knew the person who died. You could do Shmirah with them at the funeral home. Mm-hmm. And I often recommend that doing Shmirah should be a requirement for a teenager getting a driver's license. It's not enough to watch those movies where you see car crashes. It's different when you go to a funeral home, someone died, and you're saying prayers for them.
Right. Well, I think, you brought up a really good point, because a lot of times in our society, we are so afraid of anything that deals with death. We don't want to think about it. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want, we don't want our kids to have anything to do with it. So what happens is when we have that particular concept of, don't talk to the kids about death, don't, pretend or deny that it happens. And what I've learned from attending several of the conferences for Hever Kadisha and talking about the topics of Shmirah is a really good way to introduce children, not necessarily those if their parents or sibling has passed away, but because that's a totally different topic. But to start acclimating children to get used to talking around the topics of death and how to serve in the community, because you're going in, it's 2 hours of prayers. I mean, and you can ask a youth to do that. You can ask teenagers to do that. There's sometimes age requirements with funeral homes. With that, you have to be over 21. They're comfortable over 21, but have to ask them. But, college students, and just having a time of blocking out saying, I'm going to stop and pray for somebody, and having that block time. There's the age range is a little bit broader, but not being afraid to have, a youth, 8, 9, 10, hey, come sit with me while I go pray. That's important. We used to do Shmirah a lot at the funeral home, but because of COVID, we've learned to adapt and adjust what we do and how we do it. So you want to cover that for us, David?
Sure. COVID meant for a lot of us that we couldn't go into the funeral home and we couldn't do Shmirah in the same way. So people started creating virtual Shmirah, where sometimes there was a camera in the funeral home that maybe focused on the refrigerator door, but sometimes there wasn't. Sometimes there was no real physical interaction at all, and the person just had to sort of visualize what they were doing. And it's different than when you're sitting there in the funeral home, but it has some really interesting unforeseen advantages, right? So, for example, someone who's in a different country or someone who lives out of town who wasn't able to get to the funeral or get to town to be there for the funeral is able to participate. And that's a really amazing thing. That's a very important thing. Or even people who, don't have transportation, who can't get to the funeral home, or people who don't want to go out at night, or because the funeral homes not in a safe neighborhood. So it's certainly possible to blend in-person Shmirah with virtual Shmirah. And if you're trying to fill shifts in the middle of the night, for example, that's a really good, strong incentive for people to fill those shifts.
Right. Well, I know with the expansion of what we've done with COVID is I do, those that know me, I do a lot of travel. I drive a lot around a lot of different areas, different states. And there's been times where a death has happened and I can do a Shmirah shift as I'm driving in my car. And, as you were talking, we can, as I'm driving, I can pray. But one of the other things is I know several people that can have the opportunity to take shifts as they're practicing music. One a friend of mine is a very talented harpist, so he could be playing the harp as he's praying for a particular person. Other people are artists. We know a couple from the conferences. Rabbi Meira, she could take a shift as she's doing a painting, and that maybe if you know the people, then you can paint as you're praying over them. I mean, so being outside of the funeral home, there's those advantages where we don't always have to think that, oh, I can't because I got to go do this or do this, where we can broaden our horizons a little bit and maybe do some of those other creative elements. You're talking to creative. I love, music, dance, sewing, that kind of stuff. But there's others that, like the little bit more of the structure. And the blessing of being in the funeral home, again, it's more of a reality check. You're there for a specific purpose, praying for the family. I'm generally not going to dance in a funeral home. That's not my first choice, but it's some of the different things is if you're not comfortable just praying, then a lot of the funeral homes that I've experienced have a Shmirah room where they have a couch and a chair and they provide water, sometimes soda and coffee. And they have summer's limited to a very vast books that you can read about topics of, you have Psalms. A lot of times we like to read Psalms during Shmirah, or like you were saying, learning about the family or praying for them. So, yeah.
So it's interesting because there is such a wide variety for Shmirah, and it's sort of like there are no fixed written rules. It's not like there's a manual like there is for Tahara. It's much more open-ended. So some communities, for example, will have paid shomrim, paid people who will do the overnight shifts or the holiday shifts, and they'll blend that with volunteers who come in during the day. Mm-hmm. There's we've organized some national Shmirah for when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. We did had people sign up from all over the country to do 30-minute shifts. Mm-hmm. Because we have 600 people sign up.
Wow.
And this could be done for an important leader in the community or a person who covers many different communities. There is no fixed rule for exactly the right way to do it. It's just a question of what will work for the person you're caring for.
Right. Well, it was interesting. One of the Shmirahs that I did, what I had learned from the person that followed me is they were the daughter of the deceased. And it was interesting because when I was reading the Psalms, I couldn't help but sing them. And that happens not all the time, but I'm like, I mean, I'm known for dance, not for singing, for a reason. I'm not horrible, but I just don't generally sing a lot. But in a funeral home by myself, okay, let's well, I'll sing. But what was interesting was the daughter had said that the deceased was a world-renowned composer singing psalms for a living. And I'm like, okay, that kind of, takes that element, a little in a little bit broader direction. So, there's sometimes people sing, sometimes they want to just read. But a lot of like I say, in a lot of the libraries that are there, they have books on Tahara. They have books, dealing with death, grief, a lot of those kind of resources. And sometimes you're there not knowing, having a lot of information about what's happening, even in the industry, or how to help somebody else. Maybe you're friends of the family of the deceased. And this is the way that you can come in and help without really getting involved with the dynamics of the family. You can stay on the peripheral, which is an advantage as well. It's a really good segue from really being intricately attached to the family, or just, no, let me come in and pray for somebody.
Yeah, one of the most memorable experiences in the Jewish community of doing Shmirah is after 9/11. So after 9/11, the folks doing Shmirah set up at where the medical examiner's tent was. And, they didn't have any other job other than to do Shmirah, whereas everybody else is running around doing things, So often families would come in and they would pray with the families when they came in, who were not necessarily Jewish. And, they would be like the ombuds people, sort of, where people would come in and they could provide some information, because everyone else is like medical examiners running around, taking care of people, doing genetic, whatever. And there's an interesting story about, on Shabbat, they discouraged people from driving to do Shmirah at the medical examiner's tent. So the women who were students at Stern College, which was close by, could walk there. So they took over doing it during Shabbat. And, they would do 2-hour shifts, and they would actually sing the Psalms. They would be able to sing all 150 of them. But they didn't have enough time in 2 hours to do it. And on the last day, the leader of the Stern College women asked to do a double shift so that she could sing all 150 times.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. It's beautiful. I mean, because again, that's one thing that I have learned, and you see it a little bit in the death of the community, but definitely when there's mass tragedy like what happened in 9/11. I don't want to go into a lot of detail of what happened on October 7th, or even the Pittsburgh, what happened a couple of years ago. When there is a tragedy, a lot of people put their wants, needs aside to come in and help. And there's a lot of us that are there, that are working, trying to help people. And you see a group of people on the side doing nothing but praying and helping the people. Gives me that great encouragement, because they're helping in a level that is needed, but we can't, because we're operating, we have to take care of, with mass casualty, that kind of stuff has to be taken care of. But seeing the spiritual needs, or just, if you want a shoulder to cry on, or just covering the people in prayer, because there was so much happening at each one of those events, that knowing there's people that are praying and interceding, asking God for help. And because we know God could do a lot more than we can in the physical and bring that comfort. So, and I won't go real biblical on this particular topic, but we can, but it's more of whether, and I'll touch that a little bit, whether you're a biblical avid follower or on the peripheral, this is something that you can do to help another person, biblical or not. It's serving the family.
Right. So we should emphasize that it has this dual purpose, right, of providing comfort to the soul of the person who died, which in Jewish tradition we believe is hovering over the body until burial, and also providing comfort to the family, knowing that there's someone there whose sole purpose is to be with the person who died. And they're not the funeral director who's running around doing 25 different things, right? They're just there for that one purpose, for that one person. Right. And again, what is not only the impact of the volunteers' work, right? But how does it impact the person, right? How does it impact people who do Shmirah, and then when they're done, walk out of that space wherever they are? How does it impact them in their daily lives? Mm-hmm. How does it make them a better person, a more caring person, a kinder person, right? Who can understand the importance of life and that life is short? We better make good use of it.
Right. Well, and it's being, because that was one of the newest elements. I haven't done a lot of Shiva, but the times that I've done Shmirah, it's like you were saying, when I walk away after my shift, I felt like I contributed and helped support the family. And I got out of my normal routine. Sometimes you have to stop your normal routine to be able to do a shift. And when you do that and you stop and technically breathe through all of that, you're touching, it's like walking through the shadow of the valley of death, but not touching it. Mm. And when you're able to navigate through that shadow, going from sunlight, life, shadow, walking beside people who have just suffered a loss of death, and then being able to walk on the other side, it kind of, when I've done it, is put me in a perspective of being a little bit more thankful for the life I've been given and trying to make a little bit more value with what I do and not take it so much for granted that I used to.
That was beautifully said, and I think really captures, the spirit of what we're talking about. It's just so it says something also about a community that is organized enough to be able to mobilize people to drop what they're doing, right, arbitrarily for whatever period of time and do this instead, right? You could be having dinner, you could be going to the movies, you could be going to a sports event. Many people will just cancel those. They'll just go, this is more important. And having a community that's willing to be organized enough to step up and do that, along with the relatives and neighbors and friends who are willing to participate, really becomes a very vibrant kind of observance that people do.
Right, and it's it's a easy way to support, but it's also when we'll talk a little bit more about it with Shiva, because it's more apparent with Shiva, but the family doesn't always know who is there to be a shomer. Sometimes they have a guest book that you sign in. Sometimes you don't. That depends on your particular community. But when your community starts coming together and operating as putting things aside to help somebody in the area of death and being a shomer, you're starting to see the weaving together of the people in the community. Yes, I will put my life on hold. Yes, I know you need help. Let me come do this. I can come pray. I mean, how hard is it to pray? I mean, it's easy once you're there to go, okay, I can breathe. Let me pray, or read the Psalms, or read a book, write a letter or something, because you're there to guard. Do we have to guard the body? In a funeral home, not really, because there's generally not anything that's going to happen. There's no bugs that are going to get there. Most of the time, they're not going to be stolen or animals or anything like that, where the original shomer, scripturally, that was in 2 Samuel 20. But we are there. Our intention, again, is to come alongside, so this person is not alone. The family knows that they're not alone, and they have somebody walking with them in their final end steps of their journey. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point you made, that the original Shmirah was to physically guard the body from animals and body snatchers and things like that. And it's evolved to be more like an honor guard, where, we're not only guarding the body, but, comforting the soul. So that's an interesting transition that happened over time. Hopefully we won't be in a situation where we need to be physically, guarding the body also, but we don't know, that could be part of what we do also.
Right. Well, and it's important to, embrace, or at least learn the steps on this particular aspect, because who knows what's going to happen in the future. And having this as one of the tools to be a support for our community is just another way to bless our community. So with that, again, thank you, David, for talking on this topic there's always so much to learn of Shmirah. And I look forward again to another episode with you. And thank you, everybody, for tuning into GLC. And we will see you on the next episode. Y'all be blessed. Thank you.